Today's World Insight. A dark cloud over the U.S. election, with a sitting president bent on challenging the results. Uncertainty in the weeks leading to the inauguration. What's the impact? And though China-U.S. ties are seen to remain tough no matter who takes the White House in January, things may take a turn for the better under Joe Biden, according to the president of the U.S. China Business Council.
I would expect a more routine and predictable and transparent government-to-government relations.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Though Joe Biden is projected to be the U.S. election winner, he faces a rough ceiling on his way to the White House. President Donald Trump's refusal to concede and insistence on electoral fraud are shaking confidence in the results, at least among his core supporters. And when Mr. Biden does take the reins of power, he's facing a highly divided U.S. Congress and bitterly polarized America, political uncertainty and unpredictability, just to name a few, in a time of resurgent pandemic in the U.S. Between now and January the 20th inauguration, are we in for more surprises? What does it mean for U.S. trade partners who look to business as usual? Can Mr. Biden keep the U.S. on an eagle? Let's loop in our panelists. For more on U.S. presidential election, joining us in Washington, D.C., Bruce Fein, former Associate Deputy Attorney General and the General Counsel of the Federal Communications Commission under President Reagan. In Washington, D.C. as well, Todd Belt, Professor and Political Management Program Director with George Washington University. In Iowa City, Tim-C Hagel, Professor of Political Science at University of Iowa. Last but not least, in Washington, D.C., Brandon Andrews, entrepreneur and former Hill staffer. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. So much is going on where you are. We could, in the rest of the world, hardly catch up with all the latest. So, Mr. Fein, tell us what is the most significant follow-up we should have about what's going on with your election?
Now, what remains still uncertain as to how the transition during these months before January 20th will unfold. Right now, the president is being very belligerent, if you will. The general administrator of the GSA has not declared that Biden is the winner to unleash millions of dollars in funds and office space and security provisions to help the Biden transition team begin the administration with a running start, if you will. He continues to claim without any support that the election was stolen, so he's trying to build a base, I believe, or perhaps a 2024 operation, but it will divide the nation. And lastly, he's taking these acts of retaliation, firing people who explained, even though they were in his administration, that the elections were clean, and doing these last-minute gestures. At present, he announced he was reducing the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, not eliminating them. I don't know whether that was a gesture that he didn't like the Defense Department under previous secretaries, but it's still uncertain exactly what kind of havoc Mr. Trump will try to wreak during his last months in office.
I see. Mr. Andrews, let me go to you. From the Republicans' perspective, how do you look at the latest situation?
I think the question for the Trump administration and Republicans more generally is what is the end to the means of continuing this legal fight? What is the end to the means of delaying the transition? And what does it mean for the party? Immediately for President Trump, he's able to continue to raise funds, some of which certainly go to recounts, but most of which will go to pay down campaign debts and then will go to potentially funding his political activities moving forward. And so, unfortunately, there are some positive pieces in this still for President Trump that he sees in delaying this, although I don't think it's a positive thing for the nation.
Important thing is also the House election. So what do we know now, and how is the presidential election result and the drama still follow it related to the House election and the results? Professor Belt.
President-elect Biden is already trying to figure out who he wants to be in his administration. Oftentimes that means taking people out of the House and Senate. In the Senate, it depends on the state, but it usually is a gubernatorial appointment. The governor of that state would appoint somebody until the next election is able to be called. In some states, they have a special election coming up. In the House, there is a special election. It's usually within 30 days or so, but that means that there might be a few less Democrats in the House, which is very concerning because the Democrats have a very, very slim majority in the House of Representatives. There's still some seats that have to be settled, but it could be very, very difficult if the president-elect takes too many people out of the House and is going to deny himself that first 100 days of being able to govern, at least with the House, maybe not even the Senate. So it's looking very difficult.
Professor Hagel, how do you look at the latest situation? What does it say about the parties over the past 4 years if you look at the election result? And it seems that what voters are looking at, what are they for? Can we tell to a certain extent?
Basically, the Democrats have to look at themselves and say, all right, what do we need to do to reach out to voters and to get them to sway our way? Right. Of course, Republicans have problems as well, that they're split. You have a number of core Trump supporters that may split off if things turn sour from Trump, if he doesn't try to unify the party, which it's unlikely that he will. But we'll see if he wants to maintain his brand, if he has any chance of running or any idea of running in 2024, then maybe he'll try to unify the party, but if not, then maybe he'll go out in kind of a flame of glory.
The other question I really want to seek answers from all of you gentlemen is what about the capabilities of an incoming president? Given the political situation, given the divide in your country, what could be his priority? And looking at his potential cabinet members, and how do you see the priorities are likely to be lined out? Shall we go to Professor Bell, please?
I think job number one for Joe Biden, President-elect Biden, is to really try to find a way to get some sort of unity in the country, because everything else is going to flow from that in terms of actual policy measures. When I say unity, I'm talking both in terms of making sure that his presidency is not marred by any sort of, uprisings or violence or protests, and that we get over this problem that we're having now with the legitimacy of the election being undermined by the president, as well as many of his supporters, as well as many in Congress who might not be willing to work with him. So he needs to do things, and he said this from the get-go, that he wants to restore this sort of bipartisan relationship that he was very fond of when he was in the Senate. And then he needs to start working with the leaders of Congress to pass the things that he wants, which particularly are a stimulus bill and more COVID relief, as well as trying to ramp up the production and distribution of COVID vaccines that we would get. Those two things would also go a long way to helping with the first, which is trying to reunite the country. But you have to do sort of all three of them at the same thing, and that's really the policy jam. One sort of nebulous idea and two more pragmatic policy things.
Right. Earlier, people have been talking about jobs, but if you look at what the world is looking at the United States, it's whether it is going to make a U-turn about unilateralism or multilateralism, about cooperation or going alone, about America first, or maybe we could be together. So that's coming from the allies of the U.S. In Europe, in Asia, and also that's coming from the international governance debate, whether it's about the UN, WHO, WTO. So Professor Hagel, do you think the incoming president in January will be able to have enough power, capability, energy, and also wisdom to handle those issues head-on at the very beginning of the presidency?
Well, it seems certainly true that Biden, when he becomes president, will certainly make changes to foreign policy. Now, Republicans, of course, complained that Joe Biden has made mistakes in foreign policy for the whole time he was in Washington, but not everybody agrees, obviously. Democrats prefer the particular foreign policy that Biden will espouse. And as Biden has already indicated that he's going to rejoin WHO, he's going to do away with the idea of America first and reach out more to allies and try to do a better job of working with them in a variety of ways. Now, whether he's able to do that, of course, is a big question. And I would think that the foreign policy is not going to be his main priority. As was already indicated, some of the domestic things are more pressing. But to a certain extent, a president has to walk and chew gum at the same time, as we often say, which means he's got to do more than one thing at once. And so you can't just set the foreign policy issues aside. Biden will have a certain amount of power, so he isn't always going to need Congress to help him, because certainly a Republican Senate will be opposed to a number of the things, a number of the foreign policy goals that Biden has set for himself.
The other thing that many of my audience, since we are broadcasting from Beijing, will be very interested in is about the China-U.S. relations. Now, all of you gentlemen know very well it's not just about bilateral relations, it's also about geopolitics, how the structure is likely to set up between the two countries, international governance, and the list goes on. So, Mr. Andrews, reading from the latest signs about the president-elect, and also about the people that he has been choosing, and the rhetorics and the words coming from people related. How do you see the future trend?
Yeah, I think the trend will be President-elect Biden trying to strike this balance between strength. There is a narrative that President Trump has sown and used quite effectively in the United States, campaigning and both from a policy perspective, using China as a scapegoat for some problems, economic or otherwise, and also setting up China as an adversary, and his language and also some of the policy have followed that. And so President-elect Biden, when he comes in, he's going to have to show strength in some areas and calling out things that he and his administration don't agree with, whether those are on economic policy, whether those are on tariffs, whether those are on multilateral relations, whether those are on national security issues, whether those are on intellectual property concerns. Of course, there's a number of concerns there, but also not go as far when you talk about using China as a scapegoat and potentially going into places that are offensive from a cultural standpoint, places that the Trump administration was willing to go, but I don't think that you'll see the Biden administration go as they move forward with foreign affairs policy in relation to China.
Right. Professor Belt, how do you see that? Now, there is enormous amount of debate inside the U.S. as far as I understand about what's next. Certainly the Trump approach didn't work. It didn't work even for the interests of the United States, of course. It didn't work also for the general picture that China and the United States being the two largest economies in the world, the roles they should play in front of the world. But how to adjust its role? How do you see what Mr. Biden will be able to do, particularly given his earlier political legacy with the administrations and the Foreign Relations Committee, and also the current realities he has to face?
Right. You're absolutely right that Joe Biden has experience from being chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as well as being vice president under Barack Obama, where he did take a pretty big role in some foreign policy decisions, not as big as he had wanted, we hear from sources inside the White House during the Obama administration. But he does have that experience. I think the transition is vital in terms of getting information on national security and international relations to his people in a way that he can as quickly. Just today, President-elect Biden held a forum where he was hearing from former people in the national security apparatus who were briefing him on what he should expect. So he's doing what the best he can to get set up. We do know from a standpoint of the economic relations that President-elect Biden is a big believer in the doctrine of engagement, that he believes that you can solve a lot of the world's problems by having more trade. So he's not an anti-trade person, or at least using trade as a weapon quite to the same extent that President Trump is. And we see President Trump with his withdrawals from Iraq and Afghanistan today really leaving our NATO allies in a lurch. We've had some problems with, with NATO under the Trump administration. I think Joe Biden is going to try to repair those, and from those sorts of relationships, also try to build stronger economic relationships, especially with Brexit going on as well. So I think there's quite a lot to do on his plate there.
There's one thing as to what to be the very first thing, or the very first platform, the mechanism that both sides, I mean China and the United States, would be able to take advantage of in order to build some basic trust, which has been somewhat damaged over the past few years. Professor Hagel, certainly people talk about trade. People also talk about, what about the first phase, trade deal? Others say, well, why don't we start from the technology, discussion? There are others say, well, COVID-19 is a common threat, and that's a great place to start with. Professor Hagel, among all these choices, what's your take?
I think that's difficult to say to a certain extent, because there are pros and cons to each of those. My guess would be is maybe the easiest one for Biden might be the trade issue. That certainly, if you talk about pandemic issues, given the seeds that Trump has sown in terms of calling it the China virus and so forth, that maybe that one's a little bit harder to approach. But with trade, that might be a way to go in terms of less in terms of ill feelings, perhaps, between the two countries. Maybe we were on the path to a trade deal before the pandemic hit, so maybe you can retrace those steps and go further with that particular area rather than some of the others.
Very interesting topic. Mr. Fine, what's your gut feeling?
I do think perhaps less on trade, but with regard to undoing President Trump's rather erratic ending of investments and purchases, sales of electronic cyber equipment to Chinese companies, Huawei being one example. We may drop the effort to extradite the chairperson of Huawei from Canada. I think that Biden will be much more accommodating on that score. But on the military-to-military confrontation, I don't see anything diminishing at all, and I'm quite worried by because of the incoming national security team, if anything, given their history, being more aggressive than the Trump people in the South China Sea.
Now, gentlemen, earlier I was listening to a speech given by Dr. Kissinger recently at one of those conferences, and he's been talking about how important it is for both sides, China-U.S., to understand where the other party is coming from, particularly when it comes to foreign policy. He suggests, in his words, that U.S. has been having a relatively uninterrupted success throughout its growth since its birth. Of course, there are zigzagging roads. However, China, with a few thousand years history, has been having disruptions from time to time, and the ups and downs. There has always been also issues related to the neighborhood and the sovereignty issue vis-a-vis the development issue. So the two are coming from very different perspectives. One is more pragmatic, certainly in the U.S. case, some say. The other is much more evolutionary in China's case, as some suggest. Tell me about what might be the best approach you see both sides could take. Maybe this could be interesting advice for the policymakers as they are scratching their head and thinking about the near future. Professor Hagel, let's begin from you and set a great example for a brief answer.
Well, to keep it brief, I would say that it's certainly a good idea to always understand your opponent, if I can use that word, or your partner in negotiations, if you want to put it that way. But on the other hand, the American president is always going to have political considerations at home to deal with. And in of course, the case with Biden, he's going to have potentially a recalcitrant Congress that isn't going to go along with his changes, and that complicates the process.
Mr. Andrews.
2020 has certainly shown us that there's no lack of global issues, global problems, and so I think for the U.S. and China, ask the question, what global problem or problems can we start working on together? Perhaps that is COVID-19, perhaps that is global health care, but perhaps it's another area. Perhaps it's how do we protect small businesses in both of our countries as they try to navigate shutdowns and the fluctuations in the economy, given some of the healthcare challenges. But is there a common place to start to solve problems and then work out the rest of the differences from there?
Mr. Fine.
I think we need to recognize that all nations are alike in putting their own interests before others. That's what a nation is about. And we need to accept China as having its natural sphere of influence. I think if the United States will accept that, instead of being terrified, I think that's the most important thing that can be done.
Okay.
We need to have equal recognition, equal dignity. We each have our spheres of influence, and we keep peace. We work through diplomacy, not force of arms, to try to minimize any conflict.
Professor Belt.
I'm going to agree with Brandon and to some extent Professor Hagel, saying that COVID, while it is a big challenge and there are problems laid out by the current outgoing administration, I think there's a real big opportunity there. We know that, with the Chinese sharing the genome sequence for the coronavirus, that has been very helpful with the firms that have been able to start producing some vaccines. We need production and distribution of vaccines that can be a tremendous opportunity for international partnership. And then we need to prepare for the next one, because this is not the last one. We need to get testing kits and all sorts of PPE and other sorts of protective gear for medical personnel for when the next one comes, so we're better ready the next time. There's an opportunity for production and distribution of those as well around the world with the supply chains and productive capabilities of both the United States and China.
Right. Thank you so much for your insights. Todd Belt, Bruce Fain, Timothy Hagel, Brandon Andrews, really appreciate it, and have a great evening, gentlemen. And you're watching World Insight. Coming up, though China-U.S. ties are seen to remain tough no matter who takes the White House in January, things may take a turn for the better under Joe Biden, some suggest, at least from the president of U.S. China Business Council. The full interview after.
I would expect a more routine and predictable and transparent government-to-government relations.
Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Trade has been the pillar that has kept relations between China and the U.S. afloat despite stormy skies. With trade strained by tariff wars and technology lockouts under the Trump administration, ties are expected to remain somewhat tough with the projected next U.S. President Joe Biden. The silver lining, though, based on his track record, is Mr. Biden's likely more measured approach to the others, including, of course, to China, instead of the wild swings and unpredictability that marked the last 4 years, some argue. On that, I talked to Craig Allen, the president of U.S. China Business Council. Here's his thoughts. In Washington, D.C., I'm joined by Craig Allen, president of U.S. China Business Council. Mr. Allen, good to see you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
First question, how will American businesses not being caught up in the crossfire of geopolitics between China and U.S. with a presumed president coming up in the office coming January?
Well, on January 20th, we will have a transition of power. One of the areas that we should expect some changes is with regard to U.S.-China relations. But I think it's a little bit early to say exactly how that will develop. One thing that I think will be clear is that in a Biden administration, there will be a little bit less confrontation and unexpected twists and turns, executive orders, and other that have made predictability a big problem within U.S.-China relations. So I would expect a more routine and predictable and transparent government-to-government relations, which I think businesses generally will welcome, both American businesses and Chinese businesses.
Mr. Allen, dialogue mechanism, discussion platforms are extremely important. Now we see the ups and downs of these platforms. Names change, the content change, and sometimes even scrapped off, for example, during this administration. Now, what would you suggest from the business community's perspective? What kinds of dialogue, what kinds of mechanism that needs to be urgently established in order to avoid, as you said, the unpredictability which is not welcomed by either community in China and in the U.S. businesses?
Well, I think that one of the immediate questions that will confront the Biden administration will be what to do with the Phase 1 negotiations that were completed earlier this year. And I suspect that both governments will wish to fulfill this agreement in full. That has probably two parts to it. The first part more on structural or policy issues, and the second part more on expanding U.S. exports. Both governments, I think, have an interest in continuing this agreement, and then looking beyond that agreement to negotiating a Phase 2 agreement that could lead to the elimination or removal or at least reduction in the tariffs that are in place currently, blocking trade going both ways. The 1 year or 18-month agenda should be to get rid of the tariffs by reaching some form of a Phase 2 agreement, and then looking beyond that to put the relationship on more firm grounds. In the meantime, I do think that we should also be talking at the multilateral level about the World Trade Organization, and at the regional level to talk about APEC or other Asia-Pacific regional issues. China has recently entered the RCEP agreement. That is an important advance for China's economic diplomacy. And I congratulate China for this improvement, for this successful negotiation. I wonder, what does it mean for American companies, and how do we integrate ourselves, not only in China, but in the greater Asia market?
Let me just read some numbers I found out recently. A survey done by IHS Markit in late October of more than 6,600 companies in 12 countries found that companies in China reported the highest recovery rate from the coronavirus pandemic, followed by those in the U.S. And also, U.S. multinational companies, majority-owned affiliates in China, brought in sales $392.7 billion in the year 2018, up 4.8% from a year ago. That's, of course, the U.S. number. Now, given the two issues, one, there might be further geopolitical unpredictability, but on the other hand, the immediate factor of COVID-19, China's economy recovering. How do you think the American businesses should balance or could balance all of these evolving factors?
I think that we recognize that China has done a very good job at containing COVID, and that your economic growth in 2020 will be probably 3 or 4%. In 2021, probably 6% or more. And we want to be a part of that process, a part of that growth. If you look at beyond COVID, say for the next 10 years, China is almost certain to provide about 30% of global growth or more. And that's a good thing. The world needs a healthy China importing lots and keeping commodity prices higher, and being a source also of capital, of investment capital outside of China. And so I'm very happy that China is recovering, and hopeful that America, Europe, and the rest of the world will quickly find a way to get over COVID and get the world back, the global GDP, back to a more healthy 3-4% globally. We have to defeat COVID to achieve that objective.
Right.
And that will not be for 6 months. But hopefully a year from now, we will be able to return to that high level of global growth that allows all boats on the ocean to rise together. But we must defeat COVID.
There are several things I want to follow up with. First of all, since we talk about COVID, some suggest already that this could be one of the very core issues China and the United States could work together. Now, recently, Dr. Henry Kissinger, when talking during a Bloomberg conference, did talk about that, yet he did not recognize that as the most important issues of bilateral cooperation. And even when it comes to cooperation, he hesitated to illustrate further as to what nature cooperation could be established between China and the United States in various sectors. So how do you see what could be the common ground between the two countries? And certainly the business community would love it to also be realized.
Well, I think that there are two elements to that question. One is on the multilateral side, and the other is on the business-to-business side. One of the first things that the Biden administration will do is to rejoin the WHO and work within the WHO context to try to address our problems with COVID on a global basis. At the same time, I would not underestimate all of the collaboration currently underway between China and Chinese companies and American companies. As one very simple example, China has provided billions of pieces of PPE. On the research and on the production side, our companies are deeply integrated and working very closely on vaccines and therapeutics and equipment to defeat the virus. So despite the fact that relations between the two governments have not been ideal as of late, at the same time, the real work of scientific and technical collaboration and preparation for a vaccine, the production and distribution of the PPE that is necessary to protect our workers, all of that is going very smoothly.
Mr. Allen, another thing is about American companies doing business with China or in China. As we know, the tech war, quote unquote, has been one of the major components of the current administration in terms of their fight against China. How do you see the nature of it evolving and in the next couple of months and extending to the next administration?
Well, technology is evolving very quickly, and there are many changes that are being considered by both governments. I look at the results of the 14th Five-Year Plan and the 5th Plenum recently completed in China, and note that technology independence and self-reliance and a reliable supply chain and security of the supply chain seems to have been one of the major themes of the 14th Five-Year Plan. On the U.S. side, I think there is also concerns about excessive reliance on any single source supply for both telecommunications or semiconductors, medical equipment or pharmaceuticals. And so I see both governments taking steps to increase production of high tech, to promote high technology in their own countries. And I am concerned that this tendency in both countries will expand from what is clearly a national security industry, such as arms building or command and control, to more and more and more and more technologies that are less clearly associated with national security. I think that most people would agree that semiconductors do have a national security element in them. Probably also telecommunications as a national security impact. But when you get to automotive or chemical or life sciences, pharmaceutical, aviation, those arguments become strained. And so I'm hopeful that we are able to keep to the national security debate relatively confined to a small part of our GDP and have WTO rules and regulations governing everything else. Now, data is another issue, very complicated. The Chinese people, the American people have different definitions of what is private and what data should be protected. And so globally, there are no firm regulations or standards on data protection. And so I worry that this also could become an area of dispute, and that we should be careful and cautious before putting restrictions on data transfer between countries. We do not want all of our countries to become data islands which cannot communicate with each other. There is a danger that if that were to be the case, Chinese banks in America would not be able to communicate with their home banks.
Right, right.
So as technology moves quickly, these problems multiply, providing many challenges to our national regulators.
From now until the administration, new administration coming in, we at this point know who the American people eventually will put into the office, given your constitutional and legal process. But what do you think could be the best strategy for businesses on both sides?
Well, I would say that the transition process that we're going through in 2020 is quite unique. At least thus far, President Trump is reserving his rights to challenge the election results in court, and thus that process has been somewhat delayed. But I think it will not be delayed too long, and that the courts will look at the process and the fairness, the transparency, and make a final judgment very soon. And once that happens, there will be the formal transition process will begin. Now, even during that transition process, we only have one president, and it is the President Trump until January 20. And I am hopeful that he and his team will work effectively and enthusiastically with the incoming team of President-elect Biden. But there's no guarantee of that. Nonetheless, the transition teams on the Democratic Party side, under the leadership of President-elect Biden, are very active and busy and preparing for their new responsibilities. And thus, I'm confident that there will be a smooth transition of power on January 20th, just exactly as our Constitution states. The placement of the new president will be followed by a time of opportunity, hope, change, reform, openness, dialogue, understanding, and it's something that I think we should all anticipate and look forward to.
Craig Allen, the president of U.S. China Business Council, on the future of relations for the year 2021. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching.